Please take your seats. We're starting in a moment. Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our today's event, jointly organized by Open Nuclear Network, Global Neighbours, and the Diplomatic Academy. Today, we will look beyond the review conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which recently took place in New York, and we'll discuss the role of the nuclear weapon-free zones in strengthening regional and global security. In particular, we are marking today the 20th anniversary of the Semipalatinsk Treaty, the establishment of the nuclear weapon-free zone in Central Asia. Before we begin, just let me outline the program. We'll start with the opening remarks, the keynote address, then we'll move on to the panel session with questions and answers, and as final, the networking reception. Please note also that today's discussion is being live streamed. So, with that, let me introduce the first speaker who will deliver his opening remarks online. It's the Chief Executive Officer of Global Neighbours, Mr. Siddharth Chatterjee. Please, Mr. Chatterjee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexei. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by extending my sincere gratitude to the Open Nuclear Network, the Vienna School of International Studies, and my team at Global Neighbours for bringing us together for this very timely and important discussion. I am honored to join this discussion marking 20 years of the Treaty of Semipalatinsk and the Central Asian Nuclear-Free Zone, actually from Bellagio at the Rockefeller Center, where I'm involved in a discussion on how to bring about a new generation of leaders that epitomize empathy, solidarity, and more compassion. I'm especially pleased to join His Excellency Mukhtar Teluvardi, Mr. Andreas Perschow, and Ms. Martina Schubert, and the distinguished diplomats, experts, students, and participants joining us in Vienna and online. I come to this discussion not as a nuclear expert, but as someone who served the United Nations for over 3 decades and the broader humanitarian system in some of the most fragile and conflict-affected parts of the world, including Bosnia-Herzegovina, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan. Ladies and gentlemen, the consequences of conflict are never confined to battlefields or negotiating rooms. They are felt in homes, in schools, hospitals, and communities. They are carried by families forced to flee, by women and girls exposed to heightened insecurity, and by children whose futures are interrupted before they've even begun. I saw this reality directly in South Sudan while serving with the United Nations, where I was involved in the efforts to demobilize thousands of child soldiers during an active conflict. That experience shaped me profoundly, and it taught me that when prevention fails, the cost is not only geopolitical, it is human, it is intergenerational, and it is often irreversible. That is why prevention must be placed at the center of our approach to peace and security. It is both a moral responsibility and a practical necessity. We gather today at a moment of profound global uncertainty. The world is facing rising geopolitical tensions, deepening mistrust, active conflicts, humanitarian crises, climate insecurity, and growing pressures on international norms, institutions, the United Nations itself, which was designed to protect peace. These challenges know no borders, and they cannot be solved in isolation. Nuclear risk reduction is one of the most urgent responsibilities of our time. In a fragmented global environment where trust is increasingly scarce, mechanisms that build confidence and reduce the risk of miscalculation are not only useful, they are indispensable. Ladies and gentlemen, nuclear weapons-free zones are amongst these very important mechanisms. They remind us that in the context of deepening insecurity, in the context of deepening mistrust, in the context of deepening challenges to our global peace and in the environment in which we work, the Central Asian nuclear-free zone established through the Treaty of Semipalatinsk is a powerful example of that. Central Asia, and especially Kazakhstan, carries that painful legacy of Semipalatinsk, where nuclear testing left deep human environmental scars. Yet from that experience emerged a collective regional commitment to restrain cooperation and a safer future. At a time when global arms control frameworks are under pressure, regional approaches can help preserve space for cooperation, from Central Asia to the Latin American countries to the Caribbean, from Africa to Southeast Asia, the South Pacific, including Mongolia's nuclear-free status. These experiences show that nuclear restraint can take different forms. Together, they form part of a wider architecture of prevention and trust building. For global neighbors, these events speak directly to our mission. We believe in building bridges between Europe, Asia, and beyond. We believe in fact-based dialogue, cross-regional understanding, and cooperation amongst governments, international organizations, academia, business, and civil society. Nuclear risk reduction is precisely this kind of issue that requires such bridge building. No country can manage this challenge alone. No region is immune from the consequences of failure, and no generation can afford complacency. Let me recognize the important work of ONN through open source analysis, foresight, and strategic engagement. ONN is contributing to better information, better understanding, and better decision making. Let me close with this reflection. After decades of service across conflict zones and humanitarian crises, I have come to believe that peace is never automatic. It must be built, protected, renewed, and defended every day. The Treaty of Semipalatinsk reminds us that even deep historical traumas, countries choose cooperation. They can choose restraint. They can choose responsibility. They can choose a future over fear. That is the spirit we need today. Thank you again to all our partners and participants. I wish everyone a thoughtful, honest, and forward-looking discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. Our next speaker, if I may introduce, Director of Open Nuclear Network, Mr. Andreas Persbo. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And what a pleasure it is to be back at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, the oldest such academy in Europe, possibly in the world. 300 years almost. And I think it says a lot about both the need and the permanence of diplomacy in our world, and how the Vienna Academy has been part of that. This cannot be over or understated. At the Open Nuclear Network, we work towards the reduction of nuclear risks. As such, it forms part of Pax Sapiens, our Parents Foundation's overall mission, namely the prevention of predictable catastrophic risk. This is what my foundation do. Ladies and gentlemen, nuclear weapons, if you don't know what they are incredibly destructive. I often say, imagine your worst fears and then multiply them by 10, and you might have a brief glimpse of how powerful these things are. Yet, we tend to underestimate them. They are so terrifying indeed that the permanent members of the Security Council all agree that nuclear war cannot be won and cannot be fought. But despite this statement, they retain these weapons as indispensable means for their own security. What is more, and what we have started to see in later days, is that some of these states, representatives from these states, are making veiled or not so veiled threats about their use. And we have seen this in the last year, and I'm afraid we will continue to see this in the coming years. My takeaway is that they do assign a lot of utility to something they all agree shouldn't be used. The reality is that nuclear weapons are just that, weapons, instruments of war that are designed to be used in certain circumstances. They have been used in the past, and I am convinced, I am sorry to say, sadly, that for as long as they exist, they will be used again. The risk may be small, but it's persistent, and sooner or later, our luck will run out. And when that day comes, we will be asking ourselves, what did we do to prevent this? And I would like to ask yourself, when that day comes, can we look ourselves in the mirror and say, I did everything that we could? Colleagues, I think it's true that the more states that possesses these weapons systems, the more likely they are that they one day will be used in anger. And it stands to reason then to say that 9 weapon states are enough. And I think it's here where nuclear weapon-free zones come in force. Weapon-free zones are not just a moral statement. They add firm obligations to those states that sign up to them, sometimes going beyond the obligations under the non-proliferation treaty. They are doing more than other states to alleviate its risk. In my mind, the greatest service of non-nuclear weapon states in general, and the zonal states in particular, to the international community, to all of us, is to remain unarmed if they never had these weapons. It's a conscious decision to remain unarmed. And if they did have them, and we had one case of that, to disarm. They took the conscious decision to disarm. Let's be clear, there are many more states than the 9 that presently have these weapons that could acquire them if they wanted to, which is not the case in the zonal states. So nuclear weapons-free zones represent the commitment not to arm in the first place and to stay disarmed. And the absence of nuclear weapons in these zones means that they cannot be used. The risk of use by zonal states is mathematically 0. And I think this is something we need to take away. Tonight, we will hear from representatives from these zones about their reasons for signing up and how they guarantee that their respective sovereign lands in Latin America, in Africa, and Central Asia remain zones of low to no nuclear risk. And I'm very much looking forward to their discussion. And thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Presbo. Let me invite our next speaker, Ms. Martina Schubert, Deputy Director of the Vienna School of International Studies. Please.
Good afternoon. Dear participants here in the room, Excellencies, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, also online. It's a particular pleasure for me, really, to welcome you at this afternoon's conference, panel discussion about beyond the RevCon, leverage nuclear weapon-free zones for risk reduction. This conference is very timely because it takes place only shortly after the 11th Review Conference of the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which has just taken place a few days ago, end of May, in New York. And it marks the 20th anniversary of the Treaty of Semipalatinsk. As you know, Austria is a model of a geographic zone in Central Europe without nuclear weapons since its declaration of neutrality in 1955, and became a major sponsor of initiatives regarding the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. As Austrian pledge, which became then the humanitarian pledge, it was signed in 2017, this pledge. It called for a ban on nuclear weapons, and Austria was very much the initiator of this pledge because of these unacceptable consequences of a nuclear detonation, which include a tremendous loss of life and injury, radiation positioning, and the possibility of nuclear winter. Austria is a consistent supporter of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the so-called NPT, which aim is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, of promoting peaceful use of peaceful nuclear energy use, and advancing disarmament. Austria has ratified the Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, in 2018, and it sees the treaty as a crucial milestone to overcome the deadlock of arms races and mitigate catastrophic humanitarian risks. I'm very honored, therefore, that we have this afternoon such distinguished speakers today for this panel discussion, in particular His Excellency Mr. Mukhtar Tilibedi, former minister and now permanent representative of Kazakhstan to the United Nations. Welcome, whom I would like to thank for his keynote speak. I would like also to thank the speakers, Chief Executive Siddharth Chatterjee, who joined us online, as well as Director Andreas Perswo. Thank you very much for being our partners tonight. I wish you all a very interesting conference, and yes, I give back the floor to our moderator for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schubert. It's my honor to introduce our today's keynote speaker, Ambassador of Kazakhstan, His Excellency Mukhtar Tilibedi. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished audience, it's a real pleasure to be with you today at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. Let me begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to the Open Nuclear Network, Global Neighbours, and the Diplomatic Academy for organizing this timely and important seminar. Bringing together diplomats, scholars, practitioners, and young professionals to discuss some of the most pressing security challenges of our time is a valuable contribution to the international dialogue. I would also like to warmly welcome our distinguished speakers and participants. We are fortunate to have such an experienced and diverse group gathered here today. Especially, I would like to welcome Mr. Norov, the former foreign minister of Uzbekistan. I had the honor also to serve at the same time with him as a foreign ambassadors of two neighboring nations. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting at a difficult moment for international security. The world is becoming less predictable. Trust between major powers is eroding. Arms control mechanisms that took decades to build are weakening. Regional conflicts continue to generate instability, and new technologies, including artificial intelligence, are introducing risks that we are only beginning to understand. Against this backdrop, it's fair to ask a simple question: what still works, and what example can be pointed to when discussing practical and effective approaches to security? For Kazakhstan, one of those answers is clear: nuclear weapon-free zones. This year is particularly meaningful for us because we celebrate the 20th anniversary of Semipalatinsk Treaty, which established the Central Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. The story of our region is in many ways a story of transformation. Not long ago, Central Asia was associated with one of the darkest chapters of the nuclear age. More than 450 nuclear tests were conducted at the Semipalatinsk test site, leaving profound humanitarian and environmental consequences that continue to affect communities today. And it was precisely this experience that led our region to choose different future, to turn this legacy into a catalyst for change. 20 years ago, the 5 Central Asian states made a collective decision to declare our region free of nuclear weapons. Today, the Central Asia nuclear weapon-free zone remains the first and only such zone located entirely in the northern hemisphere. For Kazakhstan, this reflects a border national choice. 35 years ago, we closed the Semipalatinsk test site, and later we renounced the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal. These decisions were not always easy, but they demonstrated an important principle. Security can be built not only through deterrence, but also through cooperation, transparency, and trust. That lesson remains highly relevant today, because while the security environment has changed dramatically, the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do we reduce risks, prevent catastrophe, and create conditions for lasting peace? The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty remains the cornerstone of these efforts. Its credibility, however, depends on balanced progress across all three pillars: non-proliferation, peaceful use of nuclear energy, and disarmament. This is why the continued lack of tangible progress on nuclear disarmament remains deeply concerning. Risk reduction measures are important. Strategic dialogue is important. Arms control arrangements are important. But none of this should become substitute the ultimate objective of the world free of nuclear weapons. In this regard, Kazakhstan continues to support renewed dialogue among nuclear weapon states proposed by my President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev at the general debate of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. We also reiterate our call for the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The global norm against nuclear testing is one of humanity's most important achievements and must be preserved. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the encouraging developments in the recent years has been growing cooperation among the nuclear weapon-free zones. Together, these zones cover vast regions of the world and demonstrate that collective security based on legally binding commitments is possible. Kazakhstan has been proud to contribute to this process. In 2019 and again in 2024, we hosted 2 meetings in Astana that brought together representatives of all existing nuclear weapon-free zones, the nuclear weapon states, and international organizations and experts. The message from those discussions were clear. There is strong interest in building closer cooperation, sharing experiences, and speaking with more coordinated voice. Because at the time when international institutions are under strain, success stories matter, and nuclear weapon-free zones are one of those success stories. They show that countries with different histories, different interests, and different security concerns can still come together around the common goal. That is a message worth remembering. Allow me to conclude with one final thought. Disarmament is often discussed in the terms of treaties, protocols, and negotiations. But ultimately, it's about people. It's about protecting future generations from the devastating consequences of nuclear weapons. It's about ensuring that the tragedies experienced by communities affected by nuclear testing are never repeated. And it's about having the courage to believe that cooperation remains possible when in difficult times. And I believe discussions such as today help keep that vision alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So as we are moving on to our panel discussion, let me pass on to my colleague Ksenia, please. Ksenia, the floor is yours, and to our distinguished speakers also.
Thank you, Alexei, and I would like to invite our speakers to the panel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ksenia Bernowska. I hope it's not too loud. I'm the Engagement and Network Specialist at Open Nuclear Network, and I'm very happy to host this event today together with Global Neighbours and the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. Not the first time, and it's been a really fruitful and productive partnership for, I think, all the sides. Before we get to the panel, and I'll have the pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers today, I would like to show you a little video from a representative from Mongolia. Since I think it's already been mentioned that Mongolia has a single-state nuclear weapon-free zone status, and unfortunately we don't have a speaker today from Mongolia, but we do have a video from Ulaanbaatar from Ambassador Jargal Sayhan Sayhan. He's a chairman of Mongolian NGO Blue Banner, and he's also a former Mongolian ambassador to the United Nations, and he's been stationed in different countries in his career. So could we please turn on the video?
Good afternoon. My name is Zink Sechen. I'm former permanent representative of Mongolia to United Nations offices in New York and Vienna. Currently, I serve as chairman of Blue Banner NGO that promotes nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. I would like to thank the organizers of the meeting for inviting Blue Banner to participate in this conference at Vienna Diplomatic Academy to mark the 20th anniversary of the Semipalatinsk Treaty. I totally agree that one of the main roles of nuclear weapon-free zones is to promote risk reduction and trust building. I'm looking forward to keynote address as well as the panel discussions on regional experiences in nuclear risk reduction. Participating in this connection, I would try to contribute Mongolia's over 3 decades experience in promoting and enriching the nuclear weapon-free zone concept. Blue Banner believes that nuclear weapon-free zones have contributed enormously, not only in risk reduction, but also trust and confidence building. Over 115 states are parties to 5 nuclear weapon-free zones, with almost 40% of world's population and 60% of UN membership. That itself is an enormous accomplishment and a practical contribution to non-proliferation. The world today is witnessing emergence of second-generation zones, hopefully in the Middle East, Northeast Asia, and in the Arctic. That is, in regions where some disputes and unsettled issues and where nuclear weapon-free states have strategic interests. Establishment of zones in these areas would not be easy. However, the second comprehensive study on establishment of such zones in all their aspects currently underway will surely be useful in establishing these zones based on the rich half-century experience. These two generation zones are based on international treaties and expect legally based security assurances from nuclear weapon states. Mongolia's case has demonstrated that there are also at least 24 states that, due to the current definition and concept of nuclear weapon-free zones, are left out of the regime. Mindful of this situation, UNGA resolution on undertaking the second comprehensive study has invited member states to share their views regarding the scope of zones, in this case meaning whether individual states could be included in the regime. Any system is as strong as its weakest link. Exclusion of individual states would be the regime's Achilles heel. Their inclusion would create a serious structural gap in the concept of nuclear weapon-free zones and its strengthening. On the other hand, inclusion of individual states would establish third-generation zones, making the regime stronger and geographically broader. The third-generation zones would be based on national legislation and the arrangements arrived at by these states with nuclear weapon-free states. As one of the qualified UN experts, I'm prepared to share my view on the future of nuclear weapon-free zones. If need be, I'm also prepared to submit Blue Banner's views on the issue to be discussed. Thank you once again for the invitation. I wish the meeting great success in strengthening the regime and thus contributing to risk reduction and trust building. Thank you for your attention.
We thank Ambassador Nsaihan for his video. I know he's watching today, so thank you so much for contributing today to our event. Ambassador mentioned the second comprehensive nuclear weapon-free zone study that we have Rebecca to talk about today, so stay tuned for that one. But before we get to speaker's presentation, I would like to briefly introduce all of you to our audience. So we have Ambassador Vladimir Norov, who is the CEO of Silk Road Advisory and a former Foreign Minister of Uzbekistan. We also have Rebecca Joven. She is the Chief of Office she's the Chief of Office of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs at Vienna, and our good friend. Next, we have Ambassador Jose Antonio Zabalguitia. He's a permanent representative of Mexico to the UN in Vienna. And last but not least, we have Lunga Bangu. He's a deputy permanent representative of Mission of South Africa to the United Nations and the international organizations in Vienna. Thank you so much all for joining us today so we can actually learn about the regional experiences with nuclear weapon-free zones, but also hear from the UNODA about the nuclear weapon-free zone study that is being conducted at the moment. But first, we'll have a few rounds of questions, and then you will have an opportunity to ask your questions. So keep that in mind, maybe prepare something so there will be an opportunity to ask a question at the end. The first round of questions that I have first go to the zones and then to you, Rebecca. And let's start with Vladimir. Could you tell us, why did your region choose nuclear restraint, so choose to become nuclear weapon-free zone, and what helped make nuclear restraint sustainable in your region? Mm-hmm. And this is a question to all our zone representatives. We'll start with Vladimir Norov.
Thank you very much, Ksenia, for your question. And first of all, I would like to thank organizers for inviting me. It is great honor to be here in the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. And answering to your question, I would like to mention that Central Asia chose nuclear restraint because nuclear weapons were linked not to security or prestige, but to trauma, instability, and human suffering in our region. As his distinguished Ambassador Mukhtar Talaverdi mentioned that 456 nuclear tests was provided there in Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan from 1949 1989. At the same time, more than 1.5 million people were affected by radiation exposure. At the same time, it was a big negative impact on the environment, not only on territory Kazakhstan, but on Central Asia. At the same time, the resistance to this nuclear test was before collapsing Soviet Union by initiative Aljaz Suleimanov. He is a very famous writer of Kazakhstan in this time, was organized a special movement, Nevada Semipalatinsk, anti-nuclear movement, and it was closed in 1991. So Kazakhstan, after collapse Soviet Union, had 1,400 nuclear warheads, and Kazakhstan voluntarily give this all nuclear warheads for denuclearization. At the same time, it was support from the non-Lugar cooperative threat reduction program, which supported for the nuclearization. And why did nuclear restraint become sustainable? It is very important questions. There are three main factors helped to make nuclear restraint sustainable in our region. First, international security and economic incentives, because Central Asian states received important international support and security guarantees. First of all, it was Budapest Memorandum, and at the same time cooperation with United States, China, Russia, and at the same time it was major economic and political benefits because it increased foreign investment, expanded trade opportunities, and greater international legitimacy of Central Kazakhstan and Central Asia in the whole. Second, it is regional cooperation turned restraint into shared norms. Regional cooperation played a key role in strengthening nuclear restraint. In 1993, Uzbekistan formally proposed the creation of Central Asian nuclear weapon-free zone at the 48th United Nations General Assembly. Then, in the 1994, Kyrgyzstan supported this initiative during the 49th sessions. In 1997, all 5 Central Asian presidents endorsed the Almaty Declaration, and on 52nd United General Assembly, our leaders jointly submitted a draft resolution supporting. At the same time, 2 major issues complicated the negotiation. It is not easy, because I remember it well, because I was involved with 2 in this process. First of all, whether nuclear weapons could transit through the region. Second, how the treaty would relate to existing security agreements involving some Central Asian states. But despite these challenges, in 2002, the treaty text was finalized in Samarkand. In 2005, the final draft was adopted in Tashkent by our all member states. And in the 2006, 8 September, it was a great honor for me to sign this treaty in Semipalatinsk with His Excellency Kassym-Jomart Kemalizovich Tokayev. He was minister in this time, and now he's the president of Kazakhstan. And in March 2009, the treaty officially entered into the force, and Kyrgyzstan identified as depositary of this agreement. In 2014, all 5 nuclear weapon states signed the protocol providing negative security assurance. It was very important. In the beginning, this mostly United States, United Kingdom, and France was against such treaty, adopting this treaty, and they tried to convince Secretary General of United Nations not adopt this resolution. But there was important role played by James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterrey. They was as an expert and advisory work during this drafting process. It was great, and the center could convince the United States, Great Britain, and France to sign this document. At the same time, William Potter, the director of this Monterrey Center, played an important role. And their work as interim, Tokjan Kasenova from Kazakhstan, she was in this time interna in this center, and they played an important role. And the third, strong verification and legal commitments played important roles, certainly. The Central Asia Treaty contains concrete measures that strengthen both regional and global non-proliferation, and the Central Asia became the first countries in the world legally required to apply enhanced International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards, known as the additional protocol. And it should be mentioned that Central Asia nuclear weapon-free zone established first in the Northern Hemisphere. At the same time, we should here look to the geopolitical dimension when we're talking about it, because Central Asia, this nuclear free zone, weapon-free zone, placed between 4 nuclear powers who have nuclear arms: Russia, China, Pakistan, India, and Israel, 5 countries. But at the same time, it was possible to adopt this document, and the treaty also requires high standards for the physical protection of nuclear materials. We should not forget that Kazakhstan #1 in the world who producing nuclear material, and 40% of uran nuclear. In Uzbekistan, 5th place and producing every year 3,500 tons of nuclear material. And strongly nuclear security measures, it is demanded by this treaty, and at the same time, cooperation against illicit trafficking, nuclear smuggling, and radiological terrorism. So, treaty officially recognizes the environmental damage, it is important, and therefore include this commitment to environmental rehabilitation. And the nuclear restraint became that's why credible, because it was verifiable. And what important that these 5 nuclear power arms countries, they signed a protocol providing negative security assurance. What this means? It means that there will be no threat to countries to use or not to threat to use nuclear arms against Central Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Norov. And thank you for highlighting very comprehensively how there are many and very diverse underlying reasons for creating the nuclear weapon-free zones, especially in Central Asia context, including nuclear legacies, economic incentives, the security guarantees, and the regional cooperation. I thought it was actually very insightful that you highlighted the role of the non-governmental organizations such as CNS in establishing and helping to establish the zone, I think, which is very great for us who work for the non-profit, non-governmental organizations, that there are actual ways to engage and support the nuclear risk reduction through supporting the states and establishing the zones currently and in the future. Next, I would like to invite Ambassador Zabolgoitia to share with us the experience of Latin America and Caribbean. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think I'm heard, right? Well, first of all, I feel honored to be speaking here at the Vienna Diplomatic Academy. It is a very well-recognized platform in the institution, in the world of diplomacy, and it is really truly an honor to be part of this panel. I also want to thank Open Nuclear Network and the Global Neighbours for the invitation, and I am going to do something a little bit unorthodox, and people who know me that I'm not too orthodox all the time. And it's that I'm going to go back 40 years when I did my master's in the London School of Economics, and I had a professor, Michael Donnellan, who explained international relations theory on 4 paradigms. The idealist paradigm, which is men are good, we all seek the common wellness or common welfare. The other paradigm is realism. Man is bad, and we all want power, and we want to impose our power on others. The third one is Marxism, and everything is due to the class struggle. And the fourth one is what he called fideism, which is the world is black and white, there are no grays, and my values are the ones that are good ones, and your values, if not mine, they're bad. Okay, so oversimplifying, but usually we explain nuclear-free zones with the idealist theory. We all work towards nuclear-free zones because nuclear weapons are bad, and we all want the better stage of humanity without nuclear weapons, and then we all think that nuclear weapons should be banned, and that way we will achieve the best possible stage for humanity. So the unorthodox thing is that I am going to depart from that, which is basically my government's view, and I'll give you an analysis with a realist paradigm. And with that, I need to then give a disclaimer that whatever I say, it is my own view and not necessarily shared by the Ministry of Foreign Relations or the government of Mexico. Okay, so let's go. First matter, we need to establish ourselves back in the 1960s with the hardest situation in terms of the Cold War. The world is really divided into ideological blocks that are competing with each other, and there is very little room of maneuver for everyone that is not on one side or the other. And then I'm going to rely a little bit on geopolitics, and the main concept in geopolitics is territory. And if you think of Mexico's territory, the first thing you look at it is size, but the second one is position. And our position is 3,000-kilometer border with the United States, one of the superpowers, tremendously powerful superpower at the time, and one of the adversaries in the world in those years of the Cold War, and one of the two main possessor countries of nuclear weapons. Okay, so we have the setting, and then something terrible happens: the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, and we find out that that nuclear war is a possibility. That nuclear war can happen, and that the world was really close to nuclear war during those days, 13 days that are very well documented. So what do we do after we basically give a sigh of relief and we start to rebuild the environment on nuclear weapons in the world after the Cuban Missile Crisis? So from the standpoint of a country like Mexico, who, if there had been any use of nuclear weapons at the time, would have been terribly damaged. Probably we would have had an enormous fallout of radiation on our territory, even if not probably also a nuclear impact, or very close to our territory, a nuclear impact. Imagine a nuclear bomb dropped on San Diego or in Miami could have basically meant, like, almost if it had, the nuclear bomb had fell on Tijuana or on Matamoros or on Merida. So that is from our standpoint. We need to do something to avoid nuclear weapon, and also for the welfare of humanity, but mostly according to the realist paradigm, we have to do something for our own national security and our own national survival. Okay? No, things are not fighting with each other. The two concepts are not fighting with each other, but it's good to have both perspectives. If you look at it through the eyes of the United States, one of the nuclear powers, who also was, if we gave a sigh of relief, imagine the sigh of relief in Washington, because we were thinking of a collateral fallout, while they must have been that we just barely impeded, or we barely made it out without a nuclear confrontation. So we need to do something to avoid the possibility of a nuclear confrontation. And then look at the other side. Let's look at the perspective of the Soviet Union at the time. They also had a sigh of relief and say, well, we were very close, and we need to do something to avoid this in the future. So the whole environment was fertile for doing something to avoid the risk of nuclear weapons. So under a realist paradigm perspective, a nuclear-free zone in the Americas, in Latin America and the Caribbean, makes a lot of sense, because we have already seen, mentioned here, that one of the main effects, or one of the main objectives of having a nuclear-free zone, is reducing the risk of nuclear use or of nuclear confrontation. So, having said that, it is a lot of merit that between 1962, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and 1967, when the Treaty of Tlatelolco came into being, there was this very, very intense diplomatic labor and led by Mexico, but also with accompaniment initially with Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, and Ecuador. And we proposed to have this nuclear-free zone in our territories. And we needed to achieve two things. First, to get all the nation states at the time, and remember 1962 to 67, the decolonization process is going on. So many of the countries that are nation states today were not nation states back then at the time yet. And the other matter is that there were fewer nuclear state possessors of nuclear weapons at the time than we have today. India and Pakistan came up later to the party, so to speak. So with that, I say that it is basically the confluence of interests between nuclear weapon possessor states and peaceful-oriented and anti-nuclear weapon states like Mexico that coincided in the same sense and towards the same purpose, and that was what made it possible. With that, I'll leave it. I spoke too long, but...
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll probably cut the answers in the second and third round, so we'll make it up. But thank you so much for providing the historical overview and why Latin America and Caribbean decided to become the nuclear weapon-free zone, because I think it's very important to understand that it's not only the moral obligation, it's a very practical, very realistic approach to reducing the risks in the region, which I think a lot of people forget nowadays when they think about the role of the nuclear weapons in the security. Now I would like to give the floor to Lunga Bengu to share with us the Africa experiences.
Thank you so much, moderator, and good evening, Your Excellencies, fellow panelists, and to you all. And a special thank you to the Open Nuclear Network and the Global Neighbours, as well as the Diplomatic Academy Wien for hosting this important session. I think I'm an optimist, and I think we have a lot of things to celebrate despite the doom and the gloom. So looking at the chart over there, we see that a number of zones are celebrating anniversaries. So for the African region, we're celebrating 30 years since the signing of the Treaty of Pelindaba, and we heard from former minister and ambassador of Kazakhstan the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Central Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone, the signing at least. So for the African region, I think the short answer would be, given the context that my dear ambassador has given us, 1962, what happened? In 1964, the African leaders chose to sign an agreement, the Cairo Declaration, which then called for the creation of an international zone that would protect the African continent from nuclear weapons. But the journey has been a long one. 46 years, I was doing the math on my way here. So from the signing in 1964, 28 years elapsed. 1991, as you all recall, I know you're all historians, there was one country that possessed nuclear weapons, which was, or is my own. In 1991, that's when we then, the former government in South Africa then gave up nuclear weapons, as Mr. Percival reminded us. Another date to remember, as mentioned, was then the signing in 1996 of the Treaty of Pelindaba. And the name has significance because in Zulu, what it means is the story is finished. No more nuclear weapons, in case you want to remember that. And then in 2009, the treaty then came into effect when 28 state signatories had signed and ratified the treaty. Maybe just to say that with the strong belief that it is important to establish a nuclear weapon-free zone on the continent, our location, our geolocation, relies on the safety and security of all the African continent. So it is important for my region that we have a Middle East nuclear weapon-free zone, the establishment of Middle East, because we are all interrelated based on location. So it is still our aspiration that we will not be free without the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And I think it's, thank you for referring to the map as well, because we did a study on the nuclear weapon free zones as well with the Open Nuclear Network, and when you kind of look at how many states actually part of the zones, you realize it's around 60% of the member states of the United Nations. So in that sense, I think in the world of the great power rivalry, where those states who have nuclear weapons are the ones who are dictating the game, you actually realize that the simple majority of the countries actually chose the nuclear weapon-free status, and I think we should not forget that when it comes to the negotiations of the role of the nuclear weapons in the global security. So now, speaking of global security, I would like to give the floor to Rebecca. Since UNODA is coordinating currently the qualified group of experts that are conducting the comprehensive study on nuclear weapon-free zones, could you tell us more about this process and what it aims to achieve?
Sure. Thank you, Ksenia. It's great to be here. So thank you first to all the hosts. The friendship is mutual, and it extends to everyone involved in this event. So thank you for that. It's a great opportunity to be here, and really also want to express congratulations and appreciation, of course, first of all, to the states parties of the Central Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone on the anniversary. And there are many anniversaries, as just been said. We're heading into a period of several, and that is to be celebrated. So I appreciate you also saying that, Lunga. So and indeed, the Central Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone and generally the nuclear weapon-free zones have this very, very important contribution to the wider disarmament and non-proliferation regime. And I do want to single out a bit our Kazakh friends for really being also for the continuous commitment to this issue, for hosting the various workshops and regional meetings that you were speaking about, Ambassador, for also supporting our work as the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, including dedicated website that we maintain on nuclear weapon-free zones. So just before launching into the mechanics of the qualified group of experts, indeed, so this is an active group. It was established under UN General Assembly Resolution 79241. In 2024. And so this resolution requested a comprehensive study on the question of nuclear weapon-free zones in all its aspects. And so the Secretary General, under this resolution, has convened this qualified group of experts to prepare the study. And we, as UNODA, we serve as the secretariat for that process. And the group is composed of experts from representing all nuclear weapon-free zones, Mongolia, as well as nuclear weapon states. And I will name all the states that have nominated experts that are part of this group. It's Australia, Brazil, which is also chairing this group, China, Egypt, France, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Mexico, Mongolia, New Zealand, Russia, South Africa, Thailand, and the United Kingdom. So we see also represented on the panel here today too. And the group has had 2 substantive sessions so far. So it convened for the first time in December of last year, 1st to 5th December, and then more recently the spring from the 9th to the 13th of March. And it will be convening one more time this summer from the 13th to the 17th of July in New York. And so the process is really to include, first of all, of course, the experts bringing their expertise to the group, but also to have informal consultative meetings open to all member states, so not just limited to the representation within the group, as well as written submissions. So this was established to support the broader engagement and preparation of the study. And at the first session, at the end of last year, the group exchanged views, first of all, on the preliminary structure of the new study, and kind of determined to take a zone-by-zone approach with the thematic subsections. So that's how the group has decided to kind of tackle this work. And so enabling it to take into consideration regional specificities, but also kind of keeping a standardized approach. And there are also a specific, or the group has supported having specific sections dedicated to Mongolia's status as a single country nuclear weapon-free zone, and also the question of Middle East, which has come up, and other potential future zones, and to formulate recommendations. So between the first session and the second session, the group has also prepared inputs on the status of these existing zones and options and recommendations, as I mentioned, towards strengthening the zones. And at the second session, they undertook kind of substantive work around the draft study itself, and so kind of formulating the general framing and introduction, as well as developments that has taken place since the original study some time ago. And of course, discussing also multilateral approaches to nuclear weapon-free zones, as well as I mentioned before, the existing and potential additional ones. So within this, the idea is to put forward recommendations, as I said, and the expert submissions that emanated from this process, including the written inputs that I spoke about, were also reflected in the Secretary General's reports, and those have been. This is in line with how the resolution is formulated. So we're kind of in the final stage, I would say, of the process, and so the group will be finalizing its findings, its recommendations, its reports quite soon, with the understanding of the study basically being also submitted to the first committee this fall. So I'll stop with the kind of history lesson around the group. I hope it helps clarify.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And from what I understand, the study will be published sometime in July, right?
To be determined, possibly a little bit later. This, like any study, it has to go through internal processes. I mean, the last meeting of the group will take place in July, as I said. So after that, there'll be an internal timeline, but hopefully, by the conclusion of the summer. So don't quote me on the exact dates, but this is the expectation.
Yeah, but stay tuned once it will be published. And actually, the Mongolian ambassador, Angsai Khan, he is one of the experts on the panel as well, with whom we had the privilege to work on with the project we're doing at Open Nuclear Network. So let me just ask you one more question for me, and then we'll open it for the Q&A in the interest of time. So the second question I have for the zones representative is, what practical value do nuclear weapon-free zones still provide in terms of trust, stability, regional security, nuclear risk reduction? So we spoke about historical context, but it would be interesting to see how the zones are important in the current context. And let me again start with Ambassador Norov, then we'll go in the same order. And let's try to be around 3 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time for the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you. Today, as you know, international security environment is becoming increasingly unstable. Regional conflicts are escalating. Military forces is playing a greater role in international politics. Arms control mechanisms are weakening, and nuclear rhetoric is intensifying. Some view nuclear weapon-free zones as symbolic agreements from a more optimistic area. But we see that the practical value is growing precisely because global arms control is weakening. And first of all, they build their trust through legally binding transparency. It is more important in the region where historically rivalries and geopolitical competition, trust does not emerge naturally. That's why institutionalization by creating nuclear weapon-free zone, it is very important because it was established legally binding commitments, the same time verification measures, and regular diplomatic consultations. So now this year, presidency for this treaty in Kazakhstan, year by year, it is during this presidency, Kazakhstan organizing several special events, consultation meetings, and at the same time, Central Asia, all 5 states accepted both comprehensive safeguards agreements and the additional protocol, creating one of the strongest verification system among all nuclear weapon-free zones. Second, nuclear weapon-free zones strengthen regional stability by removing nuclear competition, because before accepting this agreement, there was some such feeling that maybe someone will reconsider the nuclear option. That's why it was very important in our area. The treaty transformed restraint into shared regional norms. As a result, the region gained greater predictability and reassurance and strategic stability. And then, third, these zones reduce nuclear risk during periods of great power confrontation. It is very important. And because nuclear weapon-free zone create legally protecting areas where nuclear weapons cannot be developed, tested, deployed, or stationed. This has direct stabilizing value, especially in Central Asia, because as I said, our region placed between two big nuclear arms countries, and at the same time with some other ambitions from some regional countries. At the time when global arms control agreements are weakening, preserving such zone is increasingly important. And fourth, nuclear weapon-free zones reinforce an important international principle that security without nuclear weapons is both possible and preferable. Today, more than half of the UN member states belong to one of the world's nuclear weapon-free zones. We should not forget about it. It is very important. And at the same time, what must change to make them more resilient? First of all, they need stronger institutional capacity. Many nuclear weapon-free zones still lack permanent secretariats, technical bodies, and rapid response mechanism. Second, they must adapt to new 21st century threats, including radiological terrorism, cyber attacks on nuclear infrastructure, and illicit trafficking of radioactive materials. Third, security assurance from nuclear weapon states must become more reliable, universal, and legally binding. For example, unfortunately, till now, United States not yet ratified this protocol which they signed. Finally, these zones require long-term technical and financial support for environmental rehabilitation, radiation monitoring, emergency preparedness, and nuclear security. And the lesson from Central Asia is clear. Even when global arms control weakens, regional cooperation can still prevent nuclear competition, institutionalizing restraints, and create durable security norms. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Norov. Ambassador Zabalgaitia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'll keep on with my analysis on the paradigm that I started in the first section. So what are the benefits? The obvious ones that are common to all other nuclear-free weapon zones: reduce the risk of nuclear use, reduce the possibility of radiological incident, either by accident or by circumstance of mistaken threat or whatever. Thirdly, that you do not need to prepare against a nuclear adversary. The normal ones, I mean, I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'd rather get the response on the ones that nobody really usually associates with this. So again, geopolitics and territory. We are in a privileged position. I mean, when you look at who has nuclear weapons in the world right now, you have two kinds of countries. Those that have superpower quality, that want to have a global deterrent against a global adversary, and others that have regional conflicts, and they are the ones that have the nuclear weapons, thinking of closer neighbors and don't reach out to beyond. And then think about Mexico. Mexico is neighbor to the most powerful superpower. So militarily, what are we going to do against any conflict, armed conflict, military conflict to the north? Very little. And then we are really privileged that there is the same situation to the south. We don't have basically military threats to the south. So if we again have the privilege of living in a nuclear-free zone, then we were able for decades to have the highest budgets on education and health in Latin America. and that gave us a higher living standard, higher welfare for our population. And we think not on terms of military balance or of threats against enemies. We built, since 1994, a strategic partnership in terms of trade with the US through NAFTA first and USMCA TEMEC later on. We don't basically have major threats to which we need to face. We have a domestic problem, which is basically organized crime, and that's where we focus our efforts in security. And you don't fight organized crime with nuclear weapons. So I will leave it at that. Very pragmatic.
Thank you so much. And I think it's very important that you highlighted, very kind of unorthodox view on it, that it's not only about the great power rivalry, but it's also about very practical spending issues and how a lot of countries have to, well, not that have to, that's their choice to spend that much money on military assets, including nuclear. And I think UNODA is doing great studies on the military budget spending. You can check out their website for the numbers. But that is a very interesting, I think, angle to look at it. Lunga Bengu, the floor is yours. Let us know about the Africa's benefit.
Yeah, I think just as the two previous speakers speaking about their regions, I think given the Treaty of Pelindaba has that same benefit. Knowing that in our region, on the African continent, there is a prohibition on nuclear testing, nuclear explosives, and hosting any testing. That definitely brings about trust, knowing that your neighbor is not planning anything, has made a commitment not to do so. Maybe just to say that in this current context, I just want to highlight just one article, Article 11 in the Pelindaba Treaty, which talks specifically about the prohibition of armed attacks on nuclear installations. Very topical at the moment, and African leaders committed that the zone will be free of attacks on nuclear installations, attacks, nuclear weapons on the continent. And with that kind of security commitment, that we can focus, as my distinguished ambassador of Mexico indicated, it helps the African continent to focus on the developmental aspects and the benefits of nuclear energy, which is also included in the Pelindaba Treaty. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, I want to re-highlight that, you highlighted the attack, well, the non-attack on the nuclear installations, and in the case of Central Asia, we have the additional protocol. So we actually see how nuclear weapon-free zones actually reinforce, the nuclear governance architecture and actually improve it, because these are not, these are not aspects that we see in all the regions, and it's countries and regional initiative to adopt those. And in the current situation, I think it's very, very relevant. Rebecca, I have a question to you about the role of nuclear weapon-free zones and how they reinforce the broader nuclear infrastructure and architecture, because we've just witnessed the NPT Review Conference that unfortunately failed to adopt the final document, which is not great, but we kind of see the overall decline of the nuclear architecture. Where do you see what role the zones play in it, and how they can maybe reinforce the current state of affairs?
Yes, no, with pleasure. I mean, the short answer is yes, they play a very important role, but perhaps I can elaborate a little more. I mean, there is certainly a link also with the NPT. Article 7 of the treaty speaks about states or recognizes the rights of groups of states to enter into regional treaties or arrangements freely arrived at that would also further and ensure the total absence of nuclear weapons in their region. So it's there and also part of the treaty, and in that sense, nuclear weapon-free zones also very much reinforce the NPT, and especially, as other speakers have said, by establishing these legally binding commitments against nuclear weapons. And we've also just heard other examples of how zones help to consolidate, regional commitments and also confidence building and trust. I think these are really important also, especially in a period of where many of the instruments are under threat and strain. So the issue of confidence building, trust building is very much inherent also in the concept of nuclear weapon-free zones. And in that sense, they very much contribute to non-proliferation and disarmament, and covering the full range from acquisition to possession to stationing to testing, as we've heard from other speakers. And I think they're great examples of just general cooperation and consultation, and again, we've heard this through the different examples across all different regions. The protocols were mentioned. I think it's worth highlighting those. I mean, these are very, very important, especially the negative security assurances that you, Ambassador, were mentioning. And that remains, I think, an important part of implementation. And there we have to be clear that there is uneven, application of those. And so, of course, the status, whether it's signature, ratification, reservations, or kind of other interpretive, declarations around those does vary. So, but as a principle, this is very, very important. And so, the continued, dialogue among states parties on how to reinforce these kinds of mechanisms, how to ensure their effective functioning, I think is really critical. In this environment. And I think, this kind of moment that we're in, also the new study, is really a great opportunity to see how we can learn lessons also from interzonal cooperation, and really what can be taken from these unique regional experiences, but also reinforcing the global norms and the global architecture. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. At this stage, I'm ready to open the floor to our audience to ask their questions. We'll collect a few, and then if you have a question to a specific speaker, please do let us know. If not, the panelists will choose whichever questions they would like to respond to. So we have one question here, and one question there. First three.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My question is open to everyone, other panelists, the representative of the nuclear weapons-free zones, as well as UNOTA. So you mentioned how it was possible to establish a nuclear weapon-free zone in your areas because countries were not interested in nuclear weapons, or because of previous traumas, or the complicated legacy of a previous regime. However, this disinterest in nuclear weapons might not be applicable to other areas of the world, especially nuclear weapon countries, especially those outside the NPT. So do you think that it's necessary to first solve their underlying security issues, and that once this has happened, they can establish a nuclear weapon-free zone? Or do you think that the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone can help solve the underlying security issues, and so take place even before that? Thank you very much.
We had a question here. And if you can, please stand up so we can also see you better, and introduce yourself very briefly as well.
Hi, Aurora Weiss, journalist. And this question goes actually to Mr. Bengu. And before all, thank you so much for such a constructive panel here today. Mr. Bengu, if we are talking about the free zones and concentrate of Africa, my question would go, what is actually happening with the free zoning the nuclear weapons from the French testings that stay especially in the desert area from Morocco and so on? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's do the last one for this round.
Hi, my name is Asali. I'm a founder of a company, Energy Rock Solutions. My question is to everyone, and I would like to know what enabling role can global partners, open nuclear network, non-profit organizations play in continue to leverage nuclear-free zones? Thank you.
Thank you. let's start answering them. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Bengu first, since the question was directed at you, and then we'll go around all the speakers.
Thank you for the question, and quite a difficult one. I think the fact that there's still nuclear testing taking place on islands that are linked to the African continent is quite a disturbing development. However, the fact that we have the Pelindaba Treaty provides a platform to then raise these matters in the United Nations system, to say we deplore, we do not support, this should not be done. And there are other places where we have been able to, as a continent, be able to raise the fact that we are disturbed by certain practices on the African continent. So I'm not here to say that all is perfect, but the fact that we have the instrument serves as a good platform to be able to link the international instrument and highlight the disturbance that the African continent has about the testing taking place. I don't know if that helps you a little bit.
If I can add just to Mr. Bangu's response, and bringing it to Latin America, we have a specific treaty against testing, which is the CTBT, and when it works in combination with the Treaty of Tlatelolco, for example, then you have something that completely protects Latin America and the Caribbean from becoming a test site or holding tests in our territories. Tlatelolco itself needs, and I think this is I'm going to go into one of the other questions, which is the first one over there. For a nuclear-free zone to work, really, you need, on the one hand, the countries that are in the nuclear-free zone, the governments to agree to establish the nuclear-free zone, and on the other hand, the nuclear possessor states to respect that area as a nuclear-free zone. If you don't have the two components, it really doesn't work as a nuclear-free zone. So, as I tried to explain in my first intervention, there is an incentive, a real politics incentive for nuclear possessor states to respect those areas, because that contributes to establishing the balance of power in nuclear terms, and also it contributes to lowering their own burden of maintaining nuclear capabilities. If you know that there is low risk to have a nuclear confrontation in a nuclear-free zone, then you can allocate your resources for a nuclear eventuality elsewhere. So in that regard, there is an incentive to uphold the nuclear-free zones from the possessor states. And basically, that's my question for both you, and complementing your very good answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca? Sure, Ambassador Norov, please go ahead first.
Thank you very much. As I said in the beginning, that Central Asia, particularly Kazakhstan, during 40 years, witnessed more than 450 nuclear tests. Perhaps every year, 10 tests. Yeah, it is a very serious challenge was. And at the same time, it is important to think that assurance by nuclear country powers, nuclear arms big powers, to fulfillment of all treaties, it is very important. That countries will strongly, regardless their political orientation or geopolitical such preferences, they all united in Central Asia to adopt this agreement and to convince big powers to ratify. It was not only one country provided special consultation with the big powers, not with all Central Asian countries worked together to convince. Second, it is important to take in that these Central Asian countries, as I said, Kazakhstan the first number producer of nuclear materials, 40% of the world. Uzbekistan, 5th. So you can imagine it is for interest of the big powers was to keep this nuclear-free zone of Central Asia working perfectly and obligatory to member states to reduce any, when we have the border with Afghanistan. There were, when Taliban and then ISIS, Islamic State, began to have some intention to obtain the nuclear materials and nuclear arms. This agreement played an important role because it raised obligation of member states of these agreements. That's why big powers and countries with the nuclear arms, they were more interested to strengthening this nuclear-free zone in Central Asia.
Quick addition before Rebecca.
Thank you. Sure, quick to finger.
Tlatelolco is the only nuclear-free zone that has the full compliance of all the nuclear possessor states. The others are still in some stages in which the protocols, which are the ones that are signed by possessor states, need to be ratified or signed yet. I think that the world is moving towards there, but Latin America and the Caribbean is the one that has the full legal instruments complete. Sorry.
Oh, please. Thank you. No, well, look, I mean, I think, of course, the value and the success of the nuclear weapon-free zones comes precisely from the voluntary nature and the collective action of those states parties to those agreements. So, as I was mentioning, also the reference to NPT and the formulation is very clear, freely arrived at, and this is quite important, I think, in how to judge the success of such instruments. But to also the question, perhaps your question about, what can be the role of different actors? I mean, I think we've heard some mention of this already. Of course, ultimately, these are agreements that states have entered into, but the role, for example, of civil society in bringing about many of these instruments and also other instruments at the multilateral level has been significant historically. So I think this is something that needs to also be recognized and appreciated, that there is much historic evidence of the importance of civil society mobilization in order to achieve and push policymakers, towards also such instruments. And the other thing I think is, of course, the analysis and the expertise also that civil society and other institutions can bring. And I think the more we can educate collectively and raise awareness of these successes, because again, yes, they are successes, and this is really something that needs to be I think especially in these overall dark and dire times needs to be highlighted, and I think especially the historic experience of your country, Lunga, is one that is really underappreciated as the only country to have voluntarily given up a nuclear weapon program. So these are the kinds of things where we need think tanks, we need academic expertise, we need institutions like these to come together and really highlight and bring better understanding. And I think also investment, of course, something that we take very seriously also in the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, investing in new generations of experts that can also carry these experiences and understandings forward and can really bring those to their own regions and draw understanding and lessons from perhaps being exposed to the experiences from other regions. And I give the example of our Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapon, which Ksenia has been a participant in. I see at least one other one in the room here from a past cohort. But we will be taking also the next phase of this program will also be to connect to regional initiatives. And so Latin America and Caribbean is kind of next on the list, also taking advantage of the fact that the Tlatelolco Treaty is celebrating a major anniversary next year. And so, again, connecting these global initiatives and young people involved in the nuclear field at the global level to these regional experiences, I think is really, really valuable in order to also sustain the understanding and momentum.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think it's a very good place for a shameless plug, but about the NGO role, I think, in promoting nuclear weapon-free zones, I think, I mean, this event itself is, I think, testament that civil society members like Open Nuclear Network, like Global Neighbours, like Diplomatic Academy are very instrumental in not only supporting the zones and the states, but also promoting and raising awareness about the existence. But also at Open Nuclear Network, we did a project on supporting the study on nuclear weapon-free zones and did the consultations with all the zones to support the experts of the panel and produce the report. So on the way back, when we have time for our light refreshments, please find the report on it. If you want to learn more about nuclear weapon-free zones, we have a little bit of a we have, well, not a little, quite a big report on the zones themselves, on the lessons learned, and also on the recommendations for both the zones and nuclear weapon states. At this moment, I would like to ask for maybe last round of questions. Let's see the hands. I think Ambassador. First question is here.
The two ambassadors.
No, it's not about. Hello. The question, yes, is more about, I would like just to add some comments
Sure.
in regarding the practical values of the nuclear weapon-free zones. It's very important to develop cooperation and dialogue between the zones, because we should stay together and to work on the common challenges and risks regarding the negative security assurances. So not all nuclear zones provided with the ratification and from all nuclear power states, let's say. Then we should consider that de facto the nuclear weaponed countries, the number is growing. So now we are talking about the negative assurances only from the 5 nuclear power states, but what about the others? Which is de facto exists. So we should the all nuclear weapon nuclear weapon free zones to raise this issue and to discuss with that countries about the assurances. The second thing, I think it's very important also to consider and to discuss between these zones the current new challenges, new developments in this area. First of all, for example, all we know that there is some discussions in Europe and some countries requesting to allocate the nuclear weapon on their territory from the nuclear power states. But we understand they not intending to possess, but to allocate. But for nuclear-free, weapon-free zones, it means that the nuclear weapon come closer to our borders. This is, for example, for today, another issue under discussion is the IAEA. It's about to avoid any attack or threat of attack to the nuclear infrastructure, to the nuclear facilities. We're witnessing that the current regional military conflicts, it's first of all the nuclear facilities becoming the aim of the attacks. And as a part of the nuclear weapon-free zone, definitely we would like to be also safe from this kind of things. Not to be attacked, by a nuclear weapon, but also not to be attacked to our nuclear facilities. This is the issue what we also should discuss between all these zones. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think Ambassador Amanazarov of Turkmenistan also wants a word.
Thank you very much. Hemra Amanazarov, Ambassador of Turkmenistan. Yeah, thanks a lot for organizing this event. It's a really timely event, and I'm also very grateful for the eminent panelists for sharing their opinions, their practice. And of course, since we are today speaking about this 20th anniversary of Semipalatinsk agreement, yes, this is because of the bold and position of the Kazakhstan on the beginning of independence, just to give up these nuclear warheads, which now make it possible that we have a Central Asia nuclear weapons free zone. This is a really commendable position, And of course, when it comes to the Central Asian countries, I think it was right from the beginning of independence where we stay in terms of this non-proliferation, especially the nuclear weapons. Because all of Central Asian countries immediately joined the non-proliferation treaty. And of course, which was mentioned by Ambassador Jose Antonio Zabalgoitia, the CTBT. All Central Asian countries immediately joined, signatories of this CTBT, and right from the beginning. And CTBT this year also marks 30th anniversary, and we all mark 30th anniversary of being part of this agreement. And next week we also hosting the event commemorating this 30th anniversary that of the CTBT and the joining of Central Asian countries. And these kind of events, when Central Asian countries comes together and give the message where we stay to international community when it comes to the issues of disarmament and non-proliferation. I think that this is also the one of the message that we are conveying from the region. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ambassador Munazarov. Do we have any questions in the audience?
Okay. I have one proposal. I would like to follow my colleagues, Ambassador, that it is initiative made by non-state organizations to organize these discussions of the role of nuclear weapon-free zones in this very challenging time. But I think the International Atomic Energy Agency should establish permanent such platform, such discussion every year, because they locate here. And it should be, because now demand for nuclear-free zone will grow when it will be more such discussion, more sharing experience, and more understanding between member states. Because some countries in the Middle East began to think about obtaining nuclear arms. Yes, because it was some challenges rising when from neighboring countries, when they're not fulfilling non-proliferation agreement. That's why it will be more important to have such platform in framework of International Atomic Energy Agency.
Thank you, Ambassador Norov. I think it's very great that we get to the kind of practical side of things and what we can do about this. I don't see any questions in the audience, so as a moderator, I actually would like to ask then maybe last one question, and then we'll let everyone go and have some food and drinks and talk, which everyone is probably looking forward to. But my last question to you is actually quite, I mean, it's not easy, but it's quite short. Where do you think the new zones can appear? Like, we have this kind of established legacy of the 5 zones plus Mongolia, but where can the new zones appear? And yeah. I'll give the floor to you first, Ambassador Norov, and then we'll go in the same order.
I think that first of all it is Middle East, because it's decades now discussing, and United Nations is supporting to establishing such nuclear-free zone. And now in a recent situation in Middle East with the conflict with Iran, and they're more thinking about it, but because otherwise they're attempt for obtaining nuclear arms among these countries will arise. That's why the international community should fully support, and certainly if there will be fine solution for in conflict, in this recent conflict, there will be some possibility. And at the same time, as it is North Eastern Asia, the Korean Peninsula, there is such some more urgently needed and more promoted by interested countries, but there's at the same time some obstacles. That's first of all, let's say North Korean nuclear ambitions. This first of all. Second, it is some geopolitical competition in this region. This rising. That's why to think that in nearest future will be established such zone, not realistic, but nevertheless, some such nuclear zones developing after the conflict. That's why it will be, I think, two regions where maybe will be more important and maybe will be in the future near some chance to establish such zone.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll go next to Lunga Bengu. Sorry if I put
No
you on the
problem.
spot.
Ready.
Reshuffling
just to agree with the previous panelist that, as indicated before, as an African, we would really wish and for the establishment of a Middle East nuclear weapon free zone. Maybe just to recall that the 1995 NPT conference called for the establishment of nuclear weapon free zones. So in this very difficult time, maybe something not so popular, but looking at just how gray it is up north, this might be the time in Europe to establish a weapons-free zone. Ambassador talked about realism, but we need idealism to say we aspire to a world free of nuclear weapons. So let's look at the gray part, especially in Europe. Yeah.
Especially Europe. Thank you. Ambassador
You set the table for me, so no, I think that being consistent with my approach today, we have a problem, and it is that the logic, the rationale behind the nuclear possessor states, the equilibrium of mutual assured destruction, and the whole logic of the nuclear arms race is a realist approach. Whereas the nuclear-free zones, the disarmament approach, the let's get rid of nuclear weapons forever, everywhere, is an idealist approach. So you have this struggle in terms of the way we see the world and the way we see the nature of humanity and the way we see what is a common good. And it is probably at this stage it is not reconcilable easily. So that gives me gets me to your question, and I think that we should look at places first where the rationale behind those states that have nuclear weapons is a very local, or is that they are focused against the neighbor next door, and before we get to the superpower level. And in that regard, I think that it is the example of Mongolia is probably very illustrative in this sense, because they decided unilaterally by themselves that they are between two nuclear powers, surrounded completely by two nuclear powers, and say, okay, here we are nuclear free. And it's commendable the way that they looked at their own situation and established their position. But to be honest, I think that we should all try to get the conditions and establish the necessary environment for having a Middle East nuclear free zone. But I think that probably we should also try to convince pairs of countries like India and Pakistan to renounce nuclear weapons and move forward in their development without them. So then I became a realist in the end, an idealist in the end. So let's see.
Well, I like the mix of perspectives. I think that's always refreshing. And Rebecca, where do you see the possible progress?
I'll answer that in a second, but I don't often disagree with Jose Antonio, but I do think it's important not to look at disarmament, arms control as a purely idealistic, through the idealistic framework. It is very much a security tool. So I think especially in this environment, we have to also re-emphasize the security benefits of disarmament and arms control. So in that sense, I see it both from the realist and the idealist perspective. But in terms of prospects, obviously there's an active GA process on a Middle East and weapons of mass destruction free zone, right? So this is again where our office, UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, has a secretariat role also to support that process. And so there have been already 6 substantive sessions of that conference. There will be a 7th happening this November in New York. Oman holds the current presidency, and there's been also a lot of intercessional work that also continues actually this month as well. So I think there, we have an active intergovernmental process that is occurring, and of course that we support as UNODA. And then I think things like the study that we kind of started from earlier today are helpful tools in terms of, again, unpacking options and presenting potential new recommendations. Again, drawing also on the full range of experiences, right? We do have different models of nuclear weapon-free zones, and so I think it's very helpful to have that in-depth analysis and hopefully to stimulate also some new and potentially creative thinking about what could be also the future of more nuclear weapon-free zones. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's very interesting that we heard today a few options of where else we can see nuclear weapon-free zones in the future, maybe in a few years or in a decade, with who knows. We'll have, a Middle Eastern nuclear weapon-free zone represented here, maybe Northeast Asia, maybe somewhere in Europe. Let's think about that. Or maybe a single state nuclear weapon-free zone someplace else, not only Mongolia. I think your point, Rebecca, about how different zones are actually very unique. If you look into how the zones are built, what the secretariats are, they are actually very unique. There is no kind of one solution to every region. And I think that offers a great variety of kind of creative inspiration, what could be done in one region and what can be done in another. Again, if you want to learn more, grab a report that Oinan prepared just to learn more about the zones and all the unique features of each of them. I would like to thank our panelists today. I think it was a great discussion. I think I learned a lot today from you, and I hope our audience online and in person learned a lot today about the nuclear weapon-free zones and their importance in the current nuclear order. We hope to have more of such positive conversations about the nuclear things. They don't happen too often, unfortunately. And I think this is one of those topics that actually make everyone come to the table and discuss things constructively and not just play the blame game, how we often do in this nuclear space. So let's have those conversations more often. Let's cooperate based on them and create more zones in the future based on very creative efforts that had already been done by the 5 zones in Mongolia and other states as well. Thank you so much for coming today, and I invite you all to have snacks and some refreshments outside and to network and to finish this evening with nice conversations, hopefully about nuclear disarmament. Thank you.
So in the end, I was